and this is Joy. Hi. And we're just really thankful for all of you guys coming out and supporting this event. It's been put on by the Social Work Association and also Love.
Love is just a group that we have here on campus for our women of diversity and minorities. And we just meet every other Wednesday. And this year, our group is just to empower women of diversity, to celebrate us, and also to strategize on how to be successful in college and life and in our walk with God.
And if you are ever interested in Social Work Association, just come talk to Emily or I. We meet Fridays at 1:30 in the Willow Room, and it's every other Friday. So if you're like, is it this Friday, is it next, just come ask us. We'd be more than happy to talk and hear ideas. So we're going to have Hannah come up and just say a prayer.
Dear Lord, I just thank you so much for this group of people here who feel very passionate about this issue, and all of the people around the world, especially who are close to us who deal with it. I just pray that you will really bless this conversation and bless our hearts to be receptive to the information we're speaking about, Lord. Help us to be empathetic, and Lord, just give us strength to be able to help those around us or ourselves, who are dealing with this issue, Lord. Thank you so much for the blessing of this day and the blessing of your people. That you will bless around us, Lord. And Lord, just be with them. Thank you so much. Hi guys, welcome to Mind Body Connections, the eating disorder discussion panel. My name is Mallory Davis, and I'm a social work major junior here. And I'm very passionate about this topic because I personally struggled with eating disorder in high school. So the Social Work Association and Love both saw that this was a very important topic to cover, and I think it's great that we're all here. So I hope you guys learned a lot. And okay, your index cards that you saw in your chair when you came in, those are for questions. At the end, we're going to be having a question section where you can direct it at one of the panelists or not, and whichever one feels most comfortable to answer it. Yeah, and there's going to be a red basket being passed around, so you can put that in because it's going to be completely anonymous. So that's probably the most comfortable way to do it. Okay, so we have 5 panelists tonight. One of them is not here. But our first one is Varland, and she's going to be talking about the physiological impact of eating disorders. She's a professor here at SAU, and she's in the Department of Health, Human Performance, and Recreation. She completed her graduate studies in exercise physiology at Ball State University, and she's been a professor here for almost 32 years, including her years teaching in China and Kenya. She's married to Roger, who's a professor in the arts department here, and she's the mother of 4 children. She enjoys exercise, being outdoors, camping, traveling, and learning about God and herself throughout the process. She has been an athlete most of her life and understands the challenges of wrestling with body image and food, especially as a Christ follower. Our next panelist is Emily Hervey, who is actually going to be up here in a YouTube video.
Jiggle the thing and she'll
Yeah.
There you go.
This is actually Tammy's daughter. And she's going to be talking about her personal experiences with eating disorder. She lives in Indianapolis, and she serves as the Employee and Community Engagement Manager at Star Media. Prior to moving back to Indianapolis last year, she lived in Washington, D.C. And there she worked for the U.S. Senator Mark Warner from Virginia. And in the Senate, she worked as a scheduler and event planner and focused on internal communications. While there, she also obtained her Master's of Public Administration from George Mason University. She started her career as an AmeriCorps Vista at a homeless advocacy agency in Indiana. After years of service, she continued with the nonprofit as the community relations manager. She is still very involved in the organization and is very passionate about ending homelessness. She received her undergraduate degree from Olivet Nazarene University, where she also played volleyball, right? Tennis. Sorry.
Okay.
Her and her husband are excited to move back to the Midwest as well. Our next panelist is Tammy, and this is her daughter, her mother. I pointed her right there. And she's going to be giving the parent perspective of living with a child who has an eating disorder. She's the Dean of School of Human Services here, and she's the mother of 3 daughters and grandmother of 4 grandchildren. She worked for the university, or she has worked for the university for 21 years. She's been married for 35. She has an appreciation for serving Christ by reaching others through education and support. Our next speaker is Betsy Vickers, and she's going to be talking about resources in the community for eating disorders. She's a partner and COO of ahealingplace, LLC in Jackson. She received her master's in social work from U of M in 2003 and her bachelor's in social work from Siena Heights in 2000. She has a passion for helping others, finding hope, healing, and freedom from eating disorders. She grew up in Jackson and battled an eating disorder for 10 years. After she was strong in her recovery, she served as an executive director of Eating Disorders and Education Network, which is a nonprofit organization. She worked to raise awareness and support in the Jackson community. She is also co-founder of Britt and TJ's Place, an organization working to create a stronger support network for individuals and families who are affected by an eating disorder. And then our last panelist tonight is Arianna, who is a sophomore here at SAU, and she's studying health and exercise science. She's going to be giving us the minority perspective of eating disorders. And she's also from Panelists. So our first speaker, I'll let you go ahead and take it, Deb. So let's give a warm welcome to Deb.
Yeah! Good girl! Well, regardless of, I'm timing myself. We have to keep my class knows I go right down to the wire. I always go, oh, we ran out of time. So I'll time myself. Regardless of why you're here, I think this is a very important issue. Some of you are here because maybe a professor offered you extra credit to come. I know that's why some of my students are here, but I think this is a very important issue. I think it's almost impossible to be a human being in this day and age and not deal with being bombarded by society, we call society, with images of what we think we're supposed to look like, how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to dress. Is my hair okay? Are my teeth okay? I mean, there's got to be something wrong. So I must be dissatisfied, and we receive so many signals to be dissatisfied with our bodies. And we're really called as Christ followers to live counterculturally, to just turn away from that, and that is very difficult. Okay, I mean, I think that was even hard for me a long, long time ago when I was in college. And at some point, I didn't know it was eating disorder, but I actually ended up kind of flirting with that a little bit, not even realizing what I was getting into. And thankfully, didn't end up going too deeply in that. But by way of introduction, I want to see if you know the first and greatest commandment in the Bible. It is to what? It starts out to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. Some leave out one of the words. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And even though the world is telling us that there's something wrong with us, Scripture tells us to love ourselves, and that it's okay to love ourselves. And each of us, whether we believe it or not, is of infinite importance to God. And sometimes we may have to tell ourselves that daily, or have someone else speaking truth into us, that each of us is just of utmost importance and beauty the way we are. And I really believe that if I can't learn to love myself the way I am, not that I don't work to self-improve, but if I can't love myself the way I am, I'm probably not going to love myself any better if whatever it is I want to change changes. I don't think I'm going to love myself more. So that's kind of my way of introduction. I get to talk about all negative things tonight, okay? Okay. I get to talk about what happens to the body physiologically when we face eating disorders, because I'm not a counselor. When Tammy emailed me, good, you can be on the panel, I said, but I'm not a counselor. So there are a lot of negative, cascading, really negative things that happen to the body physically when people suffer from eating disorders or disordered eating. And one of those, which people really think they are seeking after a lot of times, is loss of body weight. All right? And sometimes we compliment people. When you see that someone's losing weight, wow, you look great, and you lost weight. And we need to exercise caution when we do that, because we may be affirming a negative behavior in our friend. But loss of body weight may sound good, and some people, it may be beneficial to their health to lose weight, but not everyone that loses weight needs to lose weight. So along with the loss of body weight comes the loss of nutrients. You know, food is your, I like to tell my class, food is your friend. Okay, I'm teaching nutrition right now. Food is our friend, and it's not evil. Food is meant to be celebrated. It's meant to be enjoyed, especially in community. To me, it's wonderful to sit down with a bountiful table and good friends and enjoy good food. But somehow our relationship with food has become distorted. And so when we don't get enough food, as in calories, then the nutrients that come with that food, so in other words, we can get too many potato chips, okay, but that we don't get many nutrients with that. But when we're eating a balanced diet, then we receive the nutrients that come with that. And if we don't eat a balanced diet and we don't get enough nutrients and enough calories, then our energy is low. Do all of you want to have low energy? I mean, I don't think so. I think everyone wants, we want to have more energy. So I think that maybe is a foregone conclusion. Another negative that comes with low nutrients, we can end up with compromised bone density. And I don't think most college students are thinking about their bone density, okay? Oh yeah, I've been thinking about that all afternoon, about my bone density, okay? But by the time you're 25, you're pretty much finished building your bones, and when you're 25, you don't want to have the bones of a 70-year-old, and it is possible. Okay, it is possible to do so much damage when you should be building bone to be destroying bone or not building bone, and actually you can break down bones because your body will get calcium from wherever it needs to get it if you're not getting it in your diet. And if you're not getting it in your diet, then your body will take it from your bones. Okay? So that's pretty negative, I think. And so then we end up with osteoporosis, which you've probably heard. And that's where your bones become brittle from the inside out. So your bones break and then you fall. And this is not uncommon in female athletes. Females maybe more so than males because they tend to have a smaller bone, lesser bone density to begin with. And ironically enough, my first year at Spring Arbor, that's when, in my previous life, when I ran marathons for fun, I ended up with a stress fracture in my foot. And I don't know, it was probably a combination of things, but perhaps I wasn't consuming enough calories at that time. Along with decrease in nutrients, we end up with a decrease in sex hormones, and that affects the menstrual cycle for women. And guys are not exempt from eating disorders, but they are exempt from menstrual cycles. So, and we call that amenorrhea. Okay, so when you have amenorrhea, it sounds like you're praying, amen, Maria. But amenorrhea means cessation of the menstrual cycle. And I actually did have that happen to me when I was my first 2 years out of college. So all of a sudden, later on, I'm connecting the dots going, oh, okay, let's see, I had amenorrhea. Actually, I had no menstrual cycle for a year and a half. It was great. I didn't have to deal with that for a year and a half. But I didn't realize that was a marker that I wasn't consuming enough calories. Okay. Fortunately, I liked to eat. I was just really, really active. Then another negative is the loss of lean body mass, okay, aka muscle. All right, and I think it's fairly popular right now that even for women, that to be physically fit and have a strong physique and to be muscular is considered fairly attractive. It's almost like there are two looks. There's kind of a waif look, and like too thin, and then there's like this super fit look that people seem to be after. But a loss of lean body mass is not, number one, it's not attractive and it's not healthy. And so when you are in a semi-starved state, so greatly reduced calories, your body again has to get protein from somewhere. So where does it get it? It's going to get it from your muscles. Okay, if it has to, your muscles will actually break down and your muscles will suffer. We also have a decrease in metabolism, and metabolism is what allows us to eat more calories. You know how you probably have a friend that can eat all that he wants and all that she wants. You know people like that? We usually hate them. Not really hate them, but we go, oh, you make me sick. Like where do those calories go? Did they go out your foot? Or, where do those calories end up? But for people with a high metabolism, they can eat more calories. They can get away with it, I suppose we could say. But when we are in a semi-starved state, our metabolism actually slows down. And that means that our bodies now require fewer calories to sustain life. And when people lose weight, they do have to adjust to eating fewer calories, even if it's healthy weight that we lose. But we don't want to decrease metabolism. Okay? So we want to keep our metabolism up. We experience mineral losses along with that, and one of the major minerals that I'm going to mention here tonight is potassium. So it's known as an electrolyte. So when people are drinking Gatorade that has potassium in it, potassium is really important for nerve conduction and for the contraction of the heart. The heart muscle, I mean your heart, as you know, needs to contract. Well, potassium helps with that. And there have been, anyway, several celebs that have died from heart complications. Their heart stops beating, they go to cardiac arrest. The first one that I can remember, which you won't, maybe Karen Carpenter, okay? Have you even heard the name? Yeah. Well, if you look at before pictures of her, when she and her brothers with the Carpenters were this really popular singing group when I was in college, and then look right before she died, she did not look healthy. She looked really awful. She had a beautiful voice, but she died of heart arrhythmias. You can suffer kidney disease. Also, extreme laxative use will also deplete your potassium. Your hair will get thin and dry, and your skin will get dry. You can actually develop little downy hairs all over your body because it's your body trying to keep you warm because of low body fat. Your tooth enamel, if you are a bulimic, if someone is a bulimic, tooth enamel gets eroded. That's if vomiting is used as a means of purging. You can die from a ruptured esophagus. Is it bad enough yet? Okay. And I actually learned something new. I wasn't aware of this. That one of the websites I used is called Somerset and Wessex Eating Disorders Association from the UK. And I really liked their presentation of material. But I learned from them that when people repeatedly vomit, we tend to think, well, I'm getting rid of food, so that might make it sound attractive. But when in fact, yes, you do purge some food, but it also vomiting pushes food deeper into the body and actually forces it into the intestine where it's going to be digested anyway. So in other words, it may be more counterproductive than people think. And it also can become a natural response that you can't even control anymore. Another is our salivary glands in our cheeks can enlarge and make you look like you have a swollen face, and maybe like you had your wisdom teeth pulled or something. But that doesn't seem like that would be very attractive. I thought that was kind of a negative physiologic issue. How am I doing? Almost. I want to, so those are a bunch of negatives, which I couldn't find any positives, okay, as far as physiology to talk about with eating disorders. One of my favorite scriptures from 1 Samuel 16:7, when I talk about body image, so sorry, my nutrition class will probably hear this again at some point. It's when Samuel is asked to go anoint the next king, who happens to be one of the sons of Jesse. And it's kind of like all the sons get lined up, and he's looking at the sons and thinks, oh, it must be that one, because he's real tall and he's real strong. It's like, no, no, no. Does it sound familiar? Don't you have anybody else? Oh, there's just David. He's out taking care of the sheep or something like that. And David comes up, and Samuel must be having this conversation with God, kind of like, that really? You know, he doesn't look like much. And the response, at least what it says in Samuel, it says, the Lord does not look at things the way man looks at them, because man looks on the outward appearance, and the Lord looks on the heart.
Insight. Now we're going to hear from Emily.
Hey guys, I'm Emily. Thank you so much for letting me speak with you tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't be in person with you. I was very excited to come, spend the time with my family and meet all of you. But unfortunately, when the boss calls, I guess you have to go. I know I'll be able to answer some questions later live, but I just wanted to take a minute and tell you my story, a little bit about myself and the struggle that I faced with an eating disorder. It's, I'm 29 now, so more than 10 years ago, I was 18, and when I entered college is when I first experienced my eating disorder. Although I think that it probably was something I struggled with my whole life. I played sports. I was very active in junior high, high school. Always concerned with what I was eating and how much I was working out. Always weighing myself on a scale, comparing myself to my girlfriends. So it wasn't, when I went to college is when I first started more of the actions of what you would consider maybe an eating disorder. When I started to starve myself or throw up was my freshman year in college. But I had, in high school, tried those things, it never stuck. But I think it's something, I don't think it happens overnight. And so growing up, I always struggled with that. When I went to college, I played tennis. I was fortunate, but it was still, I think the biggest fear for me was your freshman 15. I just remember everyone saying that. And the workouts for tennis were not as structured, or they weren't as hard in college so as they were in high school. I was very, very afraid of gaining weight. I don't know why. I was so concerned with my body image. I can't be with you there tonight, but I think if you ask my mom afterwards if I am a controlling person or wanting to do things my way, or I'm a perfectionist, she probably will say yes to all of those things. I think people say when you lose control in everything else, it's easy to gain control in your eating disorder. It gave me structure and it gave me something to rely on. So it was my freshman year. I was 18 years old. It was the first time that I was living on my own in the dorms. I've been to Spring Arbor. I went to Olivet Nazarene University, very similar places, and I played tennis, as I explained. I don't really know what really the impetus behind right then at that time I was going to start having symptoms for a disorder. All I do know is my personality or my behaviors changed a lot. I believe, maybe a little more carefree in high school, and then when I went to college, I think I was scared. It was a lot of change. I realized that what I did in college, led to my future. And so not only was I controlling in my eating disorder, but other areas of my life, I went to being obsessive about a lot of things. I made, if I had to get all A's, I was obsessed. And so beyond that, I was also obsessed with working out. I played tennis, but that wasn't enough exercise for me. So from the very beginning, the fall of my freshman year, I played tennis, and it started off just working out more. So I would play tennis. We'd do workouts in the morning. We'd play after about 4 o'clock in the afternoon after most people's classes, and then I would also run at night. And then slowly, I continued that workout habit, which was in excess, and then I ate very few. Started only eating, 1 or 2 meals a day. A good day, and it depended on what my symptoms were. A good day, in my mind, was eating 1 meal a day in between my classes about 2 o'clock, and that could sustain me. However, after a while, it clearly was too hard to only eat 1 meal a day, especially when you're an active athlete. So that was impossible, and that's when I started throwing up. It was a way that I could eat more, play my sports, go to school and make it to classes. And then, so what I did was I never binged, much different from people who are bulimic. I never binged. I would eat a normal meal, or I would eat till I was pretty full, and then I would throw up immediately after. And then I would, that was pretty much it. It was on a cycle. So I would try and starve myself if I couldn't starve myself, and then I would throw up whatever I ate. This went on throughout my sophomore year, and I thought everything was going fine. But it was actually my best friend, my roommate, best friend from high school. We were roommates for 2 years now in college. Noticed, I think she was just picking up on things that I thought I was being secretive about. caught me throwing up. I told her it was, no big deal. I don't do it that often, but I guess immediately after that, she had called my sister, who she was close with, and my sister told my parents. The next weekend, I was really excited because my parents were making a trip to Olivet, which they would visit, but not just on the whim or for a weekend like that. So I was really excited, and so my parents. Now that I think about it, it is similar to a intervention in a way. My parents sat me down, my girlfriend was there, and they kind of in a way called me out, and I did not deny it. I just said it was no big deal. After my parents confronted me and we talked about my eating disorder, it was at that point that they decided, I did not, to seek therapy. And so we talked about it, and they wanted me to see a psychiatrist. I did not think it was a problem. I didn't think I needed to, but I agreed to because I didn't have a choice. My parents were, my parents were my support system at this time, and they kind of said, if you want to go to college, if you want any help from us, you will seek counseling. At that point, my parents reached out to our school counselors, and I know my mom could speak more about this, about what she was given as resources, but I don't think there was anything. There was nothing at our school that I recall. They had a few counselors at our school, but nobody that was specialized in an eating disorder. It was actually at that point my parents went to look in the town that my college was in, and they found a psychiatrist or a therapist. It was actually the wife of one of my professors, so she was my parents. I think got to talk to her. My parents were comfortable. She was a Christian therapist that had dealt with eating disorders in her profession. So I met with her. I met with her for about a year. I really liked her. It was not intense enough for me. Bottom line, I went and saw her 1 to 2 times a week. And I think it got me to talking and understanding my disorder, but it did not get me to stop at all. I didn't, it just wasn't, like I said, it just wasn't intense enough. So I continued going to school and continued my eating disorder, continued being obsessed about my weight, my appearance. But on top of that, being a very anxious person, obsessed with my grades still, and had to control everything in my life. It was my junior year, and then so it was about 2.5 years into my eating disorder. At that point, I think my parents had decided that enough was enough. And my actions weren't changing. I was getting sicker, and my parents sat me down over Christmas break. They said, you are dropping out of school, and you're going to, they had found a counseling center or clinic specifically for eating disorders, and you're going there in, I think it was 2 weeks. I was not going back to school, so this was quite a shock to me. And I do remember, I don't know if my mom remembers this, but I remember the first words out of my mouth was, I am not going, and they're gonna make me gain weight. That was my first response. I was paralyzed in fear that they were going to make me gain weight. I'd worked for 2.5 years really hard to make sure that I was controlling my body as much as I could. That's all I cared about. It was really hard. So I kind of accepted that. I went with my parents to visit the clinic once before I moved in there. So I went into the clinic January of 2006, and I lived there full time for about 3 months. I ate all my meals there. It was almost reconditioning yourself at the clinic. And so I had therapy classes. I was surrounded by other women that were suffering similar and very different at the same time. For me, I learned a lot about myself, I learned a lot about others, and I learned a lot about eating disorders. I had 2 therapists in there that kind of went along with my journey. So I saw them daily. It was an experience, I think, but I think for me, it was just all about breaking a habit. It's all about control. And so that's what this clinic was able to do, kind of recondition me, understanding that food isn't bad, that, I can be healthy, and that, I guess the thing that I learned the most out of, when I talk with other people about eating disorders or just about their health in general, that, for over 2.5 years, how much time and energy I put into this disorder. And in reality, I left the clinic 5-10 pounds heavier, and it actually wasn't even noticeable. I didn't notice it. I was at my healthy weight where my body was supposed to be, and for years, I had been painfully struggling to keep my body a certain way, and so they were able to show me that how to be healthy, how to love yourself, and I was able to move on and kind of stuck with what I was taught at the clinic, and instead of obsessing negatively about my body, and I really just focused on trying to stay healthy and symptom-free. I went back to school in that fall, and I graduated on time. That was a big concern of mine. I graduated on time in May 2007. Since then, I would say, gosh, that's been 8 years. So it's a very long time. I would say in the past 8 years, I have struggled. I would be lying if I say I haven't thrown up at all, or went back to obsessive about my weight. But I think what the thing is that I can get myself out of that now. I don't get stuck in that, and so I don't know the last time that I have, I honestly couldn't tell you the last time I've thrown up, because it has been years. I am very fortunate. I know when I was in the clinic alone, there were women that relapsed, men and women that came back to the clinic in the time that I was there, that were there 2 years before. And there was, so not everyone has those resources. It took that much of an intense treatment. And I think for many people suffering from an eating disorder, it takes that much of a treatment. I think you have to look at it holistically. You can't tell someone to just stop. You can't tell someone just to go to therapy. You can't just give someone drugs. You really need to look at the person and what they're experiencing holistically. I know insurance also plays a huge part, and that's something I'm very passionate about, that not everyone does not even have access to treatment. There was one woman there who I became very close with. Her name was Christina, and she was probably 40 something. She looked like she was 70. I think, over the course of the time she was alone. Her family had pretty much left her. We had taken her to church a few times with us. She was a wonderful woman, and all of a sudden I remember going in there one day and she was gone, and I never saw her again. I did not have a way to contact her because her insurance kicked her off, and she had reached her limit. And I haven't checked, but she was not healthy to go. She would have relapsed, and she very well could have died. And that's where I'm very passionate about access to service. And my mom can talk about it more, but I don't think there was adequate service at my school. There wasn't even the knowledge of how to handle an eating disorder. And I don't know how things have changed, and I don't know how things are at Spring Arbor, but I think it's great even having the conversation and understanding what people need. And so I think it's great that you guys are having this conversation, because I think that's one of the biggest things. It's not that people aren't going to suffer from eating disorders. You can do everything you can to make sure that young women and men don't have to experience an eating disorder and don't get in that position. But if they are there the adequate resources to make it short and to stop and to turn things around? And so that's, I think, you need to look at it, to help from a young age, especially young women. What are they hearing and what are they seeing? And then anyone does get caught up in something as dangerous as an eating disorder, what are we doing to help stop that and prevent that and turn that around? I was fortunate enough to have parents that loved me and a system that eventually did work for me. But I know that there's not as many fortunate people out there as me. So I'm glad I could share my story with you. I wish I had more time. I hope I didn't take too much time. Hopefully if my plane lands on time, I can zoom in with you and take some questions. But I thank you guys so much for listening to my story. And I hope it helped in any way, and that you know that I'm a resource if, ever in the future.
Now we are fortunate enough to hear from Emily's mom, Tammy. So.
Well, thank you. I might choke up a little bit. I previewed that at 6 this morning, but she sent it to me about 5:30 this morning, so it was the first time that I saw it, and kind of recapped a lot of stuff. So, actually, my oldest daughter, Sarah, came in, Emily's older sister, and they're very close, so she might have a few things to add to anything I might say. Em talks about the fact that she started having symptoms or whatever in high school, and I have to be honest that I was not aware of that at all when she was in high school. She did a fine job of avoiding it. We always had family dinners. Sundays were always a big deal with dinner. We always entertained a lot, and there was always food around, and she was always eating it, and I never thought anything of it. I had 3 daughters, and they all played multiple sports, so somebody was playing sport, or all 3 of them were playing a sport at any time during the year. And so them being active or working out, that was just the norm in our house, and my husband and I did too, and so none of it seemed inappropriate to me. And actually, when she was in college, her freshman year, I was cleaning the bathrooms up over Christmas, and I thought that there was vomit, but to tell the truth, I thought it was Sarah and not Emily. And, so I was watching her like a hawk. And so Emily was just sort of getting away with it. So when Kaylin called Sarah, who told me that it was Emily, I was kind of surprised. Emily's built different than us. Sarah and I are both tall and slender. Emily's a little smaller, and she has wider hips. And I knew she had lost weight and I had asked her about that. And I was concerned about her working out schedule, because I knew she was getting up at 5 in the morning, and she was running like 8 miles before her 8 o'clock class. And then she had her workouts. And I talked to her about that, but she just gave me a line, and I guess I just believed it. I didn't really know any different. So anyway, yeah, it was an absolutely horrible snowstorm, one of the worst snowstorms we've had. They shut the turnpike down, and we got on the turnpike anyway, and it was so bad there weren't any cops around, so we just kept driving to Olivet. And so we got up there, and she's right.
Do you remember losing your job because your boss found out that you were homeless?
So I guess, I don't know how your family dynamics are, but I am very assertive, and my daughters are too. They're all very much like me. And my husband is very laid back. And so I was the one that had to like check everything out. But he was very upset. So when we actually went to Olivet, I think it was me that did most of the talking. but the fact that he was there, I think, said a lot to Emily because she revered her dad. She's a daddy's girl. So she always would argue with us because she's extremely strong-willed. But in the end, she would always do whatever we thought should happen. And so the fact that she was argumentative and all that, that was typical. We were already prepared for that. We'd already dug our feet in. We already knew what we were going to say to her. And I've got to say that I'm really proud of our family because we all kind of hung together on it. And her sisters were a great support for her, but they also backed us. And so Em knew, she just knew. So anyway, yeah, Olivet it was the most frustrating experience as a parent. Olivet had no resources. I talked to their VP, which would be Kim Hayworth's equivalent, and she sent me to the dean, which would have been my equivalent, whatever the name of their school was that had the psychology department in it. And he didn't know of anything. And somebody else, anyway, I just got to run around. Well, then finally this dean said, you know, there's an adjunct who teaches here that has a private practice in town. Why don't I give you her number? She's a Christian. I know her. She's a high quality person. So her name was Jenny, and I talked to Jenny. And Jenny had to deal with me first, actually, because I felt so guilty. As a parent, you don't understand. I mean, I don't know. We had always thought we were instilling really good self-esteem in our daughters. You know, we'd always clap when they were little, whenever they did anything. We made sure they were involved, and we always went to everything. And we always, you know, I was a room mom, and I don't know. We always thought we were being really supportive, and they had good self-esteem. And Emily always, she was like the perfect person, which I guess is part of the problem. She, well, as you saw, she's very attractive. She's brilliant. Her trying to get all A's is not difficult for her at all. For her not to get an A would be odd. It comes so easy to her. She's very athletic. She's funny. She's kind. She's a caring heart. It's like, why would she not be happy with herself? What is there anyone would kill to be like her? You know, her generation. I couldn't figure out what did we do to her that was wrong. And Jenny had explained to me that that's part of it, that it is a perfectionist type of person is the most inclined to fall into this type of pattern. And the fact that she had such a change when she went to school and so forth would be a huge contributing pattern. And she did talk about the fact that she doesn't really have control over her classes too much. She doesn't have control over her living arrangements. She doesn't have control over who she sees or when she sees them with the family that she wants to. She was lonely. The only thing that she can really control is, you know, her food intake and her body image. So that made me feel, you know, a little bit better. And she was great. Emily signed a release that Jenny wouldn't tell us what they talked about, but she would call me like every week and let me know what was going on, if she had a good week, if she had a bad week, if, you know, just in general terms, but not what they talked about. And so, yeah, at one point, Jenny called and said, this isn't working. She's getting sicker. I can't get through to her. She needs inpatient. And so, once again, we started looking for resources. And in Michigan, there is no inpatient eating disorders clinic. There's a lot of, we live in Temperance, which is south of Monroe. It's right on the border with Toledo. We're actually 2 miles from Toledo. So everything we do is in Ohio. So There was an outpatient clinic in Dundee, which is about 20 miles from us. And she could go there like on a daily basis. I'm like, what good would that do? She's got, I don't know, I work, her sisters are in school. She would have nobody watching her. I just couldn't figure out how that would do. And Jenny was adamant that she needed inpatient. So we went online, and there were like 4 inpatient facilities in the country at that time, and one of them happened to be in Sylvania, Ohio, about 10 miles from our house, right across the line. And so I called them and talked to them, and I went over there, my husband, we went and met with them. And I talked, at the time, we had Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance. I think it was Blue Cross. Anyway, that's changed a few times, I don't remember. But anyway, they didn't cover anything outside of the state of Michigan for an inpatient. So they would only cover outpatient. So that was a problem, and so they would take cash only. Well, we've been saving for a barn for a number of years, and so we had the money in the bank. So it was, I will tell you, it was $21,000 for 3 months of inpatient and then 3 months of outpatient, because she didn't say, but after she was released inpatient, she went like every other day, and then she went once a week, and then she went once every other week. So even when she went back to school, she was still coming home like once every 6 weeks to check in with them. So it did cover like a year's period of time, all in all. But I was upset because, not that I minded spending the money, I minded the fact, like she said, there are thousands of people out there that are very, very sick that don't have that kind of cash on hand. And actually, if we hadn't been saving for that barn, I wouldn't have had the cash on hand. And they want it up front. There's no payment plan. So we, even being pretty well off, couldn't have done it. So that's really, really scary to me, because I don't know how she would have ended up had she not gone there, or had that opportunity. So anyway, it was difficult, because they wanted us to come in for family therapy. I ended up walking out. I was so ticked at the therapist. Because they started telling us things like, and I'm sure Sarah remembers this because Emily was mortified that I did this, but you know, I'm kind of strong-willed too. And I wanted to meet with them beforehand. I had a bunch of questions I wanted to ask them beforehand. And they were all about her. And, which is great, but the family system needed help too, and we didn't have anywhere to go to get that help. And so, you know, they started talking, they started asking like about our marriage and stuff, and I thought, what the heck? And that's when my husband was getting to, he was like, that's fine, we need to know how we're handling, what we need to do, you know, we need to talk to us. And they went in, and then they were telling us things like a calorie is a calorie, that's what they were telling her. And they would have her count out like Skittles in a cup, and she had to add up the calories. And I figured their system must work, but, you know, aren't they teaching her healthy eating? So those were some of the things that we dealt with. But over time, as she said, she got better, and I need to wind up so I can answer questions later. So thanks.
Thank you for sharing some personal stuff. Now we're going to be hearing about resources in our community from Betsy.
Okay, can you hear me? I have a soft voice, so I was very thankful for a microphone. My name is Betsy, which you guys probably know, and I am from Britton TJ's Place, and we are located in Jackson, and we are a eating disorder clinic anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. I'm going to spend most of the time, I'm going to show a video. So Rachel Flowers is one of our therapists who is also recovered from an eating disorder. And she also is a SAU grad. She was here a few years back. And she's going to tell you guys her story, and then there will be a slideshow about Britt and TJ's place. So Britt and TJ, unfortunately, we did not know them, but we got connected with their families after they passed away from an eating disorder. So Britt passed away from bulimia, and TJ passed away from anorexia. So you'll see a little bit more of their story. But the reality of this disorder is that it does have the highest mortality rate amongst any other mental health illness out there. So Emily is lucky, I'm lucky, Rachel is lucky, and if any of you guys are struggling, there is help. Insurance or not, we are in network with most insurance companies, but we will get you connected if you don't have insurance and get you the help that you need. So please contact us. We have our information over there. And I think the thing I want to emphasize is that this is a disorder. And I think what you guys are hearing tonight is that you can't do it on your own. Believe me, I tried. And I think probably Emily tried, and probably many people try, like, okay, I can do this. It's a disorder. There is help available. That's what my passion is. I lived in the Jackson area struggling, and I was in the same boat back then. Like, no one deals with eating disorders. And the therapist that I went to is just like, well, you need to eat something. And I'm like, well, if it was that easy, I wouldn't be here. So, but we have 4 therapists and then also a dietitian at our facility that work with eating disorders. So running low on time, but that just hopefully gives you a better idea of what we do at Britt and TJ's place, and unfortunately the reality of what eating disorders do. So,
Hi everyone. For tonight, I decided to do some research because I wanted to know the minority perspective, because when I first heard the topic, I'm like, I don't really know too many minorities who suffer from eating disorders because of stereotypes and everything. I was thinking maybe we're not as affected as the majority. So I did some research and I found out I was completely wrong. We are subject to eating disorders, but I feel like it's just not discussed in these communities. So when I did the research to see how, like, the percentages and see how many, I didn't see any specific numbers of how many minority women or men suffer from these disorders. So I thought that was a red flag, because either that means people don't seek help, or they're underreported, or they're not really expected from these communities. And I don't know anyone personally, but I feel like since there's stereotypes, like, oh, black women are curvaceous, they typically do appreciate larger body ideals, which is a stereotype, which is somewhat true, but not exactly, because I think bulimia is like one of the ones that mostly affect our community that I've researched. I've read stories about on the internet. And I thought it was pretty sad, because in our communities, we don't really expect them, so we don't really speak about them. In my family, just a small story, it was interesting because my sister is always telling me, Arianna, people are making fun of me because of my weight. And I'm like, really? And she is a senior in high school, so she's younger than I am. And she's naturally more lean than I am, so people think she's like really skinny. and they think it's unnatural. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah, people think I'm anorexic. And I was like, wow. I don't know if they expected her to be larger or what. But it put me at a shock because I was like, some people are skinny, some people are heavier. I mean, we all come in different shapes and sizes. I never really looked at her weight or compared it to myself or anything. But I feel like it really bothered her, especially when today these smaller ideals are pushed through magazines and everything, that she felt insecure about being skinny. So I don't know how to process that because I can't relate to that. And one of my other points is self-esteem affects everyone. No one's immune from these eating disorders. So I feel like every community should bring up this topic so we can solve the problems in areas that don't seem affected. And I did a paper in college writing last year about obesity because it's an epidemic. And it was about the socio-economic factors of obesity and why minority teenage adolescents tend to be heavier than their white counterparts. And there's different factors. It's called stratification, where it depends on where you live at, your income level, different factors, your body ideals that overlap. So it's hard to pinpoint, oh, well, they're this way because just this. There's too many dimensions to a specific person to count. So when you say, oh, it's just because of this, there's just too many layers to sift through to see why people do what they do. So I thought that was an interesting part of my paper because at first I was like, yeah, the stereotype because of this, we like to eat or we like to do this, get together and just eat. And that's not necessarily true either. In my family, a lot of them, even though they do eat, they do try different diets. One of them, I remember a few years ago, it seemed like my whole family was on the Medifast diet. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but it's this diet where they give you these meals. You add water and you do different things and you make your own meals. My mom, I don't know, it always looked gross to me, but everyone seemed to like it. And it was basically a low-calorie diet, so they all started losing weight. And when they stopped and got off the diet, unsubscribed or whatever, they all started to gain it back. So I'm like, okay, well, what was the point in that? So then they got it again, and then they were off, and it just became like a yo-yo diet type of thing. So it's not that minorities don't care about their weight, it's just that there's different ways people go about treating their weight. Because my family, we do go out to eat a lot. Every time I go home, it's like, Arianna's home, we're going here. After church, we always go out to eat, and we go out to eat probably 2 or 3 times a week. So it is a big issue. Growing up, I never really considered what I ate that much because it was like, oh, free food, my parents are buying, I'm just going to eat. I never really counted my body image until my mom started making comments like, your shirt's too small. And I would be like, it would kind of make me mad because it's like, whatever, I'll still wear it. But at the same time, I'm like, she's right. It does fit a little tighter than it used to. And I stopped growing some years ago. Maybe I should consider what I'm eating. And so I feel like I wanted to be more health conscious. So I did stop drinking pop for a while. I did, instead of getting the fries on the side, getting vegetables, doing something different just to maintain my weight. And that's about it with my story. Yeah, another thing I have, some of my family members did the gastric bypass surgery, and that's another popular way of treating your weight. And that's all I have for my story and my main points from the minority perspective. I feel like we should search our community, educate, and treat these illnesses and take them seriously, because since they're not expected, they're underreported and they're not really, nothing's really being done about it, which is pretty sad. And yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. And now, if you guys want to pass, if you guys have a question written down, you can pass it in the middle, and Emily's going to collect them. And then I think we only have time for like 2 or 3 questions. So, sorry for.
Betsy, while they're getting organized, could I ask a question about what would you say to the students that know that their friends or their roommates are struggling or maybe are suspicious? What would you say to them as far as advice on how to confront it, or kind of like Tammy's daughter there had a good friend that went to Tammy?
Absolutely. I would probably advise them to try to tell somebody, if
I would probably encourage them to tell somebody. I mean, if they have if their family is a good support system for them, I would encourage them to let them know. I mean, as you can see, this disorder can take your life. And so it is serious, and I think a lot of times, because it is so common, that people think like, oh, this is just a phase, or that person may not be portraying that it's not that big of a deal, which I think your daughter did as well. Like, it's not that big of a deal, but I would encourage them to talk to the nurse or a teacher, or if they have a relationship with their parents, to let somebody know. I always kind of give it to an example of, like, if you had a friend that was heavily addicted to drugs like crack cocaine, would you just sit back and just let him, destroy their life, or would you do something about it? So I think it's the same approach.
Okay. Our first question: if you have an eating disorder, will your metabolism return to normal after recovery, providing your body with enough nutrients? And how long does this take?
It won't happen fast. As a matter of fact, if someone's at an unhealthy weight, then it probably will mean gaining some weight. But that's part of the process of understanding who you are and what is healthy. It really depends greatly on the person. But yes, you can return to it. You can regain a normal metabolism, but it's not going to happen fast. I can't give how many months it would take.
This one is directed at Tammy. Do you think, as a mother, that you played a role in your daughter's development?
Probably. I mean, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, I'm not exactly sure how. I think I'm also a perfectionist. I'm very type A. I'm also very controlling. She is the spitting image of me. She looks like me. Probably I had eating disorder tendencies when I was in college. I remember trying to make myself throw up and I couldn't do it. Somebody told me you mix mustard with water. I just couldn't do it. Anyway. So probably, but totally unintentionally. A lot of it was in me. I remember when she was like 7 or 8, staring at herself in her mirror, wishing that her eyes were green. And I totally could not comprehend that. So part of it was, totally out of my control too.
Do you think that the new Curves Are Beautiful craze is a movement that is positive for women?
I think it is. I think it's definitely an approach in the right direction, because one of the things that you guys have to remember is what you see in the media and in the magazines and even on TV is 100% airbrushed. So I think we forget that when we see and look at magazines and we look at people on TV that we really think they look that way, but they don't. So I think more of the realistic look that is being presented to us of what us women and men actually look like is definitely a step in the right direction.
How do you know if you have an eating disorder or are just very health conscious?
Well, there's also an eating disorder called orthorexia. So that is categorized as being very health conscious. One of the questions I tend to ask the clients that come into my office is how, any given day, how much time would you say your eating disorder thoughts take up? And usually that's a good indicator of how kind of, how severe the eating disorder is and how long they've been struggling with eating disorders. So, but there is an eating disorder, orthorexia, that it is categorized as being very health conscious and being kind of obsessed with that.
Is that Emily started running marathons a couple of years ago, and I was really concerned because, she was running a lot when all this really, came to a head. And we had a real heart-to-heart conversation about the running. And she knows she has to be careful about that. But she does limit her miles that she runs a day, and she limits the amount of marathons that she does run. And so she's put some boundaries on it, which is, I think, is good. And she seems like she's got it somewhat under control, regarding that. But kind of goes along with that.
Well, that's all the questions. The other ones have been answered. So thank you guys for sharing. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure I can speak for everyone for all your insights tonight. So why don't I just close with